And I call this meeting to order. Please join me for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome everyone. I will do a quick review of tonight's agenda. I will call for any proposed changes to tonight's agenda. We'll then go to public comment, and nobody has sent in any comment cards for our meeting, and nobody has submitted online. So it looks like we're not going to have public comment, and there's no response to last. Then we'll go to the consent agenda, which has our city council meeting minutes from our February 5th meeting, as well as resolution 2024-05, delegation of authority to approve solid waste franchise rate adjustments, as well as a contract amendment for operations, maintenance, and management services for the drinking water and wastewater treatment plants. Under new business, we have a public hearing, ordinance 2024-01, on the clear and objective code audit, land use file number 23-046 DCA. We'll then round off our evening with the report from our city manager and our council and committee reports. And then just a reminder to everyone is we'll have a urban renewal board meeting at the conclusion of the city council meeting. With that, Jeff, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mayor, Councilor Mayton,
Present.
Councilor Smallwood.
Here.
Councilor Sheldon,
Here.
Councilor Walker,
Here.
Councilor Exner,
Here.
Councilor Hokinson,
Here.
Mayor Pulliam.
Here. With that, I will call for any proposed changes to tonight's agenda. Hearing none, I'll move ahead to public comment. As I mentioned earlier, there's been no public comment either here in person or online submitted, and we have no response to the previous comments. So with that, we'll move ahead to our consent agenda with our city council meeting minutes from February 5th, 2024, resolution 2024-05, and a contract amendment for the operations, maintenance, and management services for our drink water and wastewater treatment plants. Unless there's discussion, I'll entertain a motion for adoption of the consent agenda.
I move to adopt the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Councilor Hokinson, a second by Councilor Exner to adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye or give me a thumbs up. Aye. Opposed, nays, or a thumbs down. Motion carries. Moving ahead to our new business, we'll move ahead at our public hearing. I will open our public hearing for State Ordinance 2024-01 at 7:29 p.m. Are there any abstentions from the hearing body?
No.
Hearing none, are there any conflicts of interest from the hearing body? Moving forward, I will now call for Kelly to provide us with the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor. So I wasn't actually going to go through this entire staff report. What we tried to do in it was kind of lay out the main points from the clear and objective audit, such as the different bills that it's addressing, and then also just explaining through the general findings section how we met the statutory requirements of sending notice to both all the property owners in Sandy and then also to different agencies such as DLCD and ODOT. What I did want to spend a couple minutes on before I turn it over to Kate, and she'll be with MIG, Kate Rogers, as you've met before, and she'll be going through a short presentation. What I did want to just focus on is just, it's been a long time coming to this point, and we've had a lot of staff involved in this. Our city attorney has been instrumental in this. MIG, APG, which Kate and Kathy Corliss both work for, have been instrumental. And I really did want to sincerely thank the council. You guys prioritized this with the goal setting session. You budgeted for it, and it's something that our code has needed for a long time. And I do want to say thank you to the council for making this a priority and getting us to where we are today, because that would not have occurred without you guys. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Thank you both. I am going to share some here. Make sure I pick the right one. Oh, there we go. All right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and having me. So just to remind you all, I know you're very familiar with this project. We've been going through it over a year and a half or maybe 2 years. It's been a while. So thanks for your patience with that, but just for anyone who might be tuning in, to review the purpose of the project, is to ensure that the City of Sandy Development Code is consistent with Oregon state laws and legislation, primarily Oregon statute, and specifically ORS 197A.400, which is the new number. It was formerly ORS 197.307, and that has to do with clear and objective requirements for housing. So cities, local governments can only apply clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures to the development of housing, with a few exceptions that are outlined in statute. And regulations also cannot discourage needed housing through unreasonable cost or delay. So that was kind of the primary objective here. To talk a little bit about what clear and objective regulations are. So these are regulations that use terms, definitions, and measurements that provide for a consistent interpretation of the standard. There's no need or ability for a reviewer to use any discretion in making a decision for applying the standard. So there's really no gray area for interpretation. Two people reviewing the same application and applying the same standards would reach the same conclusion, get the same result. And this offers a simplified review process that can save time and money for the applicant, and increases the certainty of approval. It also simplifies things for staff and makes the regulations easier to apply to an application. So the statute does allow for an optional discretionary review path. So applicants can choose the clear and objective path or the discretionary path. And the clear objective path, again, specifies that the criteria and ways that involve no discretion or interpretation. And the discretionary path, requires the applicant to kind of make the case for why their project meets kind of more flexible guidelines or the intent of the regulation. And so this can offer more flexibility for the applicant, but it also allows some more discretion for the reviewer, which can also be beneficial to the city in some cases. And Sandy's code already provides some discretionary options through adjustments, variances, and design recommendations that are applied through the design review process. So along the way, we also kind of picked up some other state regulations that had changed based on legislation over the last couple of years to incorporate those into Sandy's code. So one of those is House Bill 2583, which passed in 2021, which eliminates occupancy limits for dwelling units based on familial or non-familial relationships. So there was a few places in the code that we had to address issues that related to definitions and regulations for dwelling units related to occupancy limits. House Bill 4064 had to do with manufactured housing and prohibits cities from subjecting manufactured homes built on individual lots, so not in manufactured dwelling parks, but prohibits cities from applying standards to manufactured homes that don't also apply to site-built homes. So kind of leveling the playing field for manufactured homes built on individual lots. And then there are several affordable housing laws that passed over the last couple of years that require cities to allow affordable housing developments in certain situations. Senate Bill 8, which passed in 2021, requires Sandy and other cities to allow affordable housing that meets certain criteria and allows height and density bonuses. And that, again, these requirements apply to an application. They're sort of allowed regardless of whether the city chooses to incorporate them into the development code. So even if you chose, not to incorporate those into the code, an applicant could apply under the statute for the provisions that are allowed through state law. So just to keep that in mind, we're incorporating them into the code to make it easier for staff to kind of understand the code and interpret it. And should an application come up, it'll make that process smoother. But just to point out that, there's not much room for the city to make a lot of decisions in these areas. So that was Senate Bill 8. The House Bill 2008, I think,
Yep,
That's kind
you got it right.
Thank you. 2008 has kind of a similar allowance for properties owned by a religious nonprofit organization. Didn't have the same height and density bonuses, but there are also require cities to approve those developments. And then House Bill 3395, which passed last year, also requires certain affordable housing projects and middle income housing projects to be approved on commercial properties. And then we also incorporated some other provisions and sort of sections of the municipal code that were identified as needing to be updated. One of those was the dark sky ordinance, which is referenced quite a bit in the development code. So that also needed to be clear and objective to meet the requirements. So we kind of addressed those issues and also incorporated some LED lighting provisions and laser light display provisions, which come up as needing to be addressed. There was a recommendation from staff to add an exception to tree removal permits for parks maintenance. And this is a similar kind of exception process for that already applies to infrastructure maintenance. So just kind of extending that to parks maintenance, park and trail maintenance as well. As you all remember, the transportation system plan was adopted last year, and there were a number of code recommendations that came out of that process. So we incorporated that into the clear and objective code audit project to make sure that all of those standards as they apply to housing are also clear and objective. And then lastly, the food and beverage cart updates amendment project. That was just kind of a separate project that we sort of rolled into the amendment package. So just to remind you that we've talked to you about these issues a couple of times, and you've had an opportunity to review the draft amendments and provide direction and input at 2 work sessions. In June 2023, you reviewed the first initial draft and provided direction on some of the key issues and decision points, so kind of areas where we needed some policy direction. And then we made some updates to the draft amendments after that. And then in November 2023, you reviewed those additional changes and provided some additional policy direction. So the updates that are in the most recent version of the code packet are really mostly pretty minor, or they're necessary to implement further legislation that was also passed in 2023.
They just keep meeting.
Incorporated. So we did hear at the Planning Commission hearing, we went through and there were some very detailed comments about the code package. They were really helpful, and they kind of caught some issues that we hadn't noticed, or maybe some issues that we hadn't been addressing as part of the clear and objective code audit project, but were opportunities to improve the code and make it a little clearer and more straightforward. And so those included some removing some diagrams that have been in the code for a long time and that were really outdated and not very clear. Opportunities to clarify some definitions, including the facing definition in terms of a building elevation facing the street, tree grove, height of buildings, and primary entrance. So all those definitions were clarified. Also, we did update all the ORS references that where the numbers changed from last year to this year, fixed all those. In the commercial zone design standards, there were a couple places where we saw the need to clarify requirements related to roof forms over primary building entrances. We also added a shed roof as an option. That was a thing that apparently has come up a lot as a request from applicants and is often approved by the city.
Is that just a street?
Exactly.
And then clarifying some of the exterior siding material requirements. So really pretty minor changes, and then other sort of minor clarifications here and there.
Can I just add some of that too?
Yeah.
That I just wanted to recognize, and I think Councilor Mayton attended virtually. The Planning Commission really took a deep dive and did a thorough, I think several of them, 3 or 4 of them at least, I think read the entire 296 pages, which I was very impressed. I mean, they caught a few little things that we overlooked that were very impressive that they caught them, and very helpful that they caught them as well. So I just want to let you know that the planning commission did a thorough job of going through that code. I mean, when you agree, like,
Absolutely.
I was pretty impressed.
I haven't really seen that before.
Yeah, it was
So,
impressive, I will say.
And then one more, somewhat more substantive, issue or item, that we incorporated was another piece of legislation from 2023 that just kind of slipped under our radar that actually amended some of the, provisions from Senate Bill 8 from 2021 related to affordable housing. That expanded the eligibility criteria for the affordable housing projects that are allowed as part of that statute. So previously, the eligibility, the ownership eligibility was publicly owned projects and those owned by a religious nonprofit organization. And this legislation expanded the criteria to include essentially nonprofit affordable housing developers, housing authority, and a manufactured dwelling park cooperative. So it also expanded the eligibility to manufactured dwelling parks that are reserved for households with incomes of 120% or less of the area median income.
Does this address that public comment letter you all got that was in the attachment? So that this.
On the
new
next
thing-
slide, I think Kate's gonna,
Okay,
that's a
got
great
it.
question, and I think on the next slide, Kate's gonna get to that,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it partially addresses that comment. Yeah, so that that was the only written comment that was
I
received.
want to see that.
And it was specifically a request to extend or expand the eligibility to include both for-profit and nonprofit. That was what the comment requested. So this gets kind of partway there. It does expand it to nonprofit organizations, but not to for-profit companies to build affordable housing, which is a less common situation, but it does happen. And I think that was what that public commenter was asking for. But just to remind you that those criteria are outlined in state statute, so there's not much flexibility for the city. I mean, you could expand, if you chose to, you could expand it to include for-profit companies. But I think we were just trying to stick to what's in the statute and following that. So I think the recommendation from us and staff would be to maybe consider that as part of a separate project. But if you wanted to kind of follow the public commenter's request, but maybe not as part of this project.
Given that they are allowed to increase the density by 200%, I think the nonprofits would be, limiting it to nonprofits versus for-profit folks is adequate, enough sideboards, not enough sideboards in my point, but it'd be a free-for-all otherwise.
Yeah, we definitely appreciated the public comment, but yeah, we did not change anything to be for profit, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So that's all I have in terms of presentation.
The only other thing I was gonna say is that, I did forget to say this in my opening remarks, is that Exhibit D, Kate put that together, and that does a very thorough job of walking through exactly the changes from the planning commission hearing, so I think that's about 4 or 5 pages long.
Yeah.
And that really highlights exactly what was modified. And then the other thing, which was asked by Counselor Walker before we started the meeting, which was a really good question, and I wanted to highlight that. If you did decide to adopt ordinance 2024-01 tonight, it would, or at a later hearing, either way, our city attorney did write it in such a way that it would be effective immediately by emergency. So it would be effective. Once you do the second reading, it will be effective.
All right, thank you for the staff report. With that, I'm going to provide guidelines for those who wish to speak during public testimony. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It is sufficient to state that you agree with the statements of a previous speaker, even if that's all you say. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by the body, they must formally be placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that, either before or after you speak, email your materials to recorder@ci.sandy.or.us, and staff will make sure your evidence is properly processed. To offer public testimony tonight, for those joining us here in person this evening, please raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak. If you're participating online, click the raised hand button. and wait to be recognized. And if you're participating via telephone, dial *9 in order to raise your hand and wait to be recognized. I will now call on each person when it's their turn to speak. A reminder that each participant will receive up to 3 minutes to testify, and Jeff, our city recorder, will let you know when you have 20 seconds remaining. Our council rules require each person to state your name and address for the record. I will now call for any testimony on the proposed ordinances.
Okay, Mayor, looking for any raised hands in the room. Seeing none, looking online. And Mayor, I don't see any raised hands.
All right, will you please provide us with the staff recap and recommendation?
Yeah, after many years of getting this project off the ground, I think we're finally there, and I feel confident that we have a very good code in front of you tonight, and we would recommend approval.
Thank you. With that, I will call for a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
On a motion by Counselor Sheldon and a second by Counselor Mayton to close the public hearing. All those in favor signify by saying aye or give me a thumbs up. Aye. Opposed, nays, or a thumbs down. Motion carries. I will close this public hearing at 7:48. With that, is there any discussion or questions for staff?
I just have a quick question, Kelly. When I look at this in the clear objective path versus the discretionary path, if we allow, do we have to allow a discretionary path? And then the second thing is, if we do allow that, do we end up setting precedents by when we allow something and then the next person be able to say that, well, this person did that, and so on and so on?
I actually will let our city attorney answer that. I think that to be honest, the precedence question is always a very interesting one. And I've always taken the approach that it's pretty hard to set precedents, but I'll let Josh have that question.
So the answer to your first question is no, you do not have to allow a discretionary path. Many, virtually all, maybe all communities do have a discretionary path just because there are often things that you might want to allow under the right circumstances that you don't want to allow, just as a matter of course. In terms of setting precedent, my answer is going to be similar to Kelly's. You know, what the city is required to do in each case for each application is to apply the code to the facts of that case and reach the correct application. And so if you make a mistake in a prior decision, you don't have to carry that mistake forward. So precedent is not common. Prior decisions could come into play if you were being arbitrary in your decision making. But it's usually not a situation where you're going to be talking about prior decisions as a precedent for a future decision.
So is it important that we develop a good record, I guess, of why we're allowing the discretionary path?
So the code allows for a clear and objective path and a discretionary path if elected by the applicant. So the applicant may choose to go under the clear and objective path or choose to go under the discretionary path. So the important thing is if someone does elect that discretionary path, that your decision articulate why you made your determination based on the criteria in the code. And there is value in the code itself explaining the purposes of that discretionary path as well.
The one thing I would add to that too is the legislation that's likely to pass the variance bill that Kara Richter spoke to. Okay. I just want.
I mean, that's probably why.
No, it's a great question. I just want to remind everybody of that bill as well.
And it's moving. No.
Yeah, it's moving pretty good, I think.
All right, any
Thank
other
you.
questions or discussion? Well, before we get moving, just thank you for all of your work.
Yes.
Throwing this on this. Appreciate it. All right, Jeff, I will call for the first reading of ordinance 2024-01.
Okay, Mayor, this is ordinance 2024-01, an ordinance amending certain chapters of Title 15 and Title 17 of the Sandy Municipal Code.
I will call for a motion to approve the first reading.
I move to approve the first reading of ordinance 2024-01.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Counselor Walker and a second by Counselor Exner to approve the first reading. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nays, or thumbs down. Motion carries. Hearing a unanimous approval on the first reading, I will call for the second reading of ordinance 2024-01.
Yes, Mayor, ordinance 2024-01, an ordinance amending certain chapters of Title 15 and Title 17 of the Sandy Municipal Code.
Is there a motion to approve the second reading?
Make a motion to approve the second reading.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Counselor Mayton and a second by Counselor Sheldon to approve the second reading of ordinance 2024-01. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nays. Motion carries. All right, big deal. This was a huge council goal of ours, a couple of years back.
Good job.
Continuing on. Got the staff, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Good
Thank you
job,
both. for
everybody. Thank you.
So
we start
over next year? Well, how's this work?
Yeah. Stop meeting this session.
Start
Holy
meeting.
gracious, right? Like crazy.
It is an interesting thing. We'll talk about that more at another meeting.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, thank you guys. With that, let's move ahead to our report from our city manager. Tyler.
I did not expect to be speaking so early this
Yes.
season. That went very quickly.
Yes.
This wasn't on my list of things to bring up, but I will just add to the municipal code update that we just did. There are, a handful of other things that we want to get updated that don't pertain to chapters 15 and 17. And staff's aware of those things. We're working on a list of other code updates that need to happen. Be bringing those back before the council in the next couple months. I just wanted to give a nod to the continued effort and work that needs to happen with the code and minor updates that need to happen. But thank you, Kelly, and your staff and planning commission for getting us this far with all clear and objective stuff. Want to do a brief recap of legislative updates / affairs. We have two different asks out there currently. One is for 3 million. In one bill, we've got another $5.9 million ask for the replacement essentially of the headworks at the
We actually,
treatment plant.
I'm sorry.
No.
We actually amended the 5.9 to be more general for Sandy Clean Waters generally, because the 3 million ended up
Okay.
focusing specifically on the headworks, so we thought it would give us more flexibility.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah. So we've got several asks out there. Nellie's been super helpful as always with keeping us in tune of who we need to talk to next and what's happening down in Salem. I know the mayor spoke, I believe, twice last week,
Twice.
providing public testimony.
Yep.
Don't want to steal your thunder.
Did my thing.
But so we are just hitting the ground hard, trying to get as much money as we possibly can for our infrastructure needs. So hopefully we have good news in the next couple weeks. But we're definitely not. We're definitely being very proactive this go around and trying to get as much recognition of our wastewater needs out there. Keep repeating the same, messaging over and over again, how this is going to help our ratepayers. Every dollar we get is a benefit to our ratepayers.
Yeah, I would just say, you never can't just go cash that check, right? But it feels different and better than the last session. And it feels more receptive, and I think the wastewater ask is really strong. And because it leads to that housing moratorium and housing coming out of there. It's been really good. Nellie's done a phenomenal job. And you say you're from Sandy in that building, they're all very aware of what's going on with wastewater.
Yeah, we keep hearing that, oh yeah, we know about Sandy.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah, it's great.
wish it was under different circumstances, right? But it's good to know that our name has made it sort of across the board as far as the issues that we face with our infrastructure needs. I don't know if Nellie's on
She is.
tonight.
She
Nellie,
is,
do you have
yeah.
any other feedback or updates you want to provide? Just put you on the spot real quick.
No, I think you covered it. Thank you so much. I think it's been a busy whirlwind session. But I do think that we definitely have raised recognition, like everyone said. But just so everyone is aware, this bill that we're in with David Gomberg, I'm trying to not get too into the weeds, but essentially the $3 million ask was capped. We weren't given an option to expand beyond that. And I think the overall goal was to get all these infrastructure projects into the governor's bill. So even though this happened on the House side, which is kind of backwards or counterintuitive from going through the Capital Construction Committee, which is generally how it's all done, we're going to have this House bill in Ways and Means, and then that bill will likely get put into the governor's bill throughout the process in Ways and Means. So the goal is to stay on that list and get that funded. But just as an aside, we did want to maintain that we testified in front of Capital Construction for a general fund ask as well. Which, thank you, Stan. It was a good. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and we've only got a few left. So thank you all for all your help.
Thank you. Good job.
And then last but not least, on my end, I just want to briefly talk about funding for the Hoodland Library. This has been kind of an ongoing topic. We, Mayor and I met with some county representatives, end of November, I guess now, on this ask to help pay for the Hoodland rent. So Hoodland Library is, represented by about 7,000 unincorporated Clackamas County residents. Sandy entered an IGA years and years and years ago to basically operate the Hoodland Library on behalf of the county. But Hoodland doesn't have a permanent home. They have this ongoing rent issue that's about $25,000 a year. That's basically just coming out of the district revenue. And so our ask, and part of this longer story that I'm trying to summarize, was getting to a point where.
And they're I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're also they're the only one that's in this lease agreement through the entire county. Everybody else has actual brick and mortar that the county provided to them.
Yeah.
There's one exception. Malalas has a rental agreement with the school district. They pay $1 a year.
Yeah,
for
which,
that.
and they have not spent, my understanding, they have not spent their allocation of capital construction of their library. We got $1 million in 2009, I think, to go towards our library construction. Malala hasn't spent their capital construction yet. They're saving up money. So a little bit of a different beast there. But essentially, we met with the county and we had a really, I thought, promising meeting back in November with an avenue to fund Hoodland for the next 5 years with approximately $25,000 a year for 5 years. The board had a conversation about that in, I should have wrote the date down, January. Thank you, Counselor. Where essentially,
16,
that's okay, January 16th. They essentially, didn't feel like they had adequate information to continue the discussion. They wanted to table the conversation. A couple other comments made during that meeting that
It was more than a little frustrating,
but
but
it
putting
was-
words in my mouth.
there was a lack of understanding of what the ask was and how far along we had gotten to forming a coherent ask that had the county administrator's support. So that conversation was tabled. There was an email that went out last week, 2 weeks ago, 14th, I believe it was, from the mayor to talk about
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day was a love note, to talk about the future of Hoodland and how we can get back on a positive dialogue to fund this long term. Part of that email requested that the county have a position or a response to our request by today. And the county commissioners were on recess last week, so we don't have a response from them today. I wanted to just give that brief update that we don't have a next step yet. I will just reiterate that we thought we were in a very good position going into that last meeting that the county had. I'm going to continue to work with the county administrator on how we can formalize that ask in a different way. If there needs to be more involvement from the council, maybe there's a letter. Don't have all the ins and outs there, but just wanted to give you the brief update that we're still pressing forward with that ask. We're hopeful that we'll be able to get that across the finish line to provide a stable funding source for Hoodland going forward for the next 5 years.
You know
Please.
me, I'm just dying to get in.
I know, go ahead.
So I'll try not to confuse the issue. I know if I don't, Kathleen might. So part of what's happening here, let me tell me if I explain this right. Part of what's happening here is that, and you saw that in the email I sent, so there's a concern that the commissioners are confuting this issue of Hoodland Library being the only library, or pretty much the only library in unincorporated Clackamas County that has this lease agreement, with an ongoing conversation that's going on in the county right now between being able to use operational money for capital maintenance expenses, okay? And so I would argue, and all due respect to anyone who may be watching this meeting, that perhaps the issue wasn't presented very well to the commission as to what we are asking versus the difference between what we are asking and what's being debated about. And so then we got this debate about this other issue. That is not what we are asking. What we are asking is specifically for Hoodland. And so where I was trying to direct in the email that I sent to the Board of Commissioners and all of you is to clarify, right? Please kind of we always do with Tyler in our one-on-ones, please go in, talk to Gary, your county administrator, hear from him, the horse's mouth, the conversations going on between him and Tyler, get that feedback, make a decision, communicate that, and come back to us. What I would report to council is I believe that Commissioner West is towards the side of the county stepping up and supporting Hoodland Library from a conversation. Commissioner Schultz, the one that originally proposed it. So that would leave 3 other counselors. I would say Commissioner Savas is very, he's very kind of in the weeds on the library issue and very concerned about this capital maintenance issue. But needs to recognize that this is a separate issue. And while I understand that the county would like to get out of the library business, that was said and was made pretty clear in that meeting, and that's what they were trying to do by getting out, the agreement from several years ago. I don't understand where it is all of a sudden the city's responsibility to be picking up the sole responsibility outside of our boundaries of these libraries in unincorporated areas. And while I know there was agreements made way back, I would argue we don't have our officers in the city of Estacada anymore either. So you make decisions, previous councils make decisions that you change and revisit all the time. So anyway, so that's where we're at. We're waiting for the commission to get back to us. And if commissioners are going back to see how we'd react to this, we're providing more time, and my request continues that you check in with your administrator and communicate in some fashion back to our council, because we support the Hoodland Library for the Hoodland community. We like to see it there, but we believe that that others need to step forward to make sure it's a reality.
And this, I'll just add on to
Yeah.
that, we, the city of Sandy covers the mortgage payment for for our library. That was as part of the new, when the library districts were formed, the actual cap bond or mortgage, whatever it was, whatever you call it.
Construction loan.
Yeah, construction loan. That was determined that the city had to pay that without using any of the library district money, so that those could all go to service, buy books and staff and all that. And so in this situation, because they don't own the library, the rent for the library is considered an operating expense and not a capital investment expense. And so having the county, for the $25,000 a year, which is really a pittance, as we could all assume. But it's a big thing to them, because $25,000 a year more to their operation expenses could increase staffing, increase open hours and all that, which is very important. And it means a lot to them. It's I'm sure small scale for, the county, but it's important for the Hoodland Library to have that support. And so we think we thought we had a yes in November, but there has been this confusion about the whole other issue that's kind of.
And one factoid I'd want to cap off this conversation with is, if you're watching this and you just think we'll go get a bookmobile and bring it out there and service the Hoodland community, Tyler, how much do bookmobiles cost when we research those?
Well, we're up to about almost $300,000 for a vehicle fully outfitted now, let alone the continued staffing expense that goes with that. So we are hitting the ground hard for our own bookmobile purposes to find grant funding to offset the council allocation you've already provided.
So we're talking a lease of $25,000 a year, or into a more permanent, and that's the other thing that should be talked about, right? Is
Yep.
This is kind of a Band-Aid to trying to find a more permanent situation for the Hoodland Library.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna add that after your cap on the
Yeah.
conversation. This was really just the Band-Aid for 5 years to figure out what can we do long-term, or what can the county do long-term for a permanent home for Hoodland? There's a need for a lot of other services in the Hoodland area. And so is there a joint effort to get a permanent site either constructed or get into a permanent building that doesn't have a monthly rental cost to it, to fix this issue in perpetuity, instead of having to have this sort of ongoing conversation about rental expenditures that no other libraries are really facing.
And we're paying for the bookmobile for out of city funds, but it's going to be going to Boring and, Welch's and all
Anywhere
these other
within
places,
the-
so.
Well, and we're not. We haven't found it yet.
Well,
Not at the price we can afford.
Well,
Yeah.
they're
Short about
shopping,
2 grand.
Yeah.
they're
Right.
shopping, they're kicking tires.
Thank you for that, Tyler.
Yep, thank you. That's all I have.
All right, cool. With that, Don.
Wow, first of all, thanks for approving the Veolia extension as part of the consent agenda, just. Many may not be aware, but they're the guys that keep the sewer stuff all running, the day-to-day operations, and their contract has been, it was running out, we didn't have time, and so the renewal will keep things going. They've been doing a great job, and maybe we don't recognize those guys enough, but just want to say thanks to them. And I think that's it. I think that's about all I should say tonight, so thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Carl.
I'm gonna keep it short too. I have 2 questions, one for the chief or inter chief, whatever that is. One of the things I get almost all the time is people running red lights. It just seems like, and I can, not every time, but most of the time, I'm sitting there at the junction of Wolf and 26, and I have a green light and I can count to 2 or 3, and there's a truck going through it. We really do need to do something about those kind of things. And also, I was at Meinig and 26, and the same thing happened, and cars tend to push that thing a lot. I don't know. I know you can't train the same person all the time because there's 40,000 cars a day going through, but boy, it just seems kind of dangerous. So I don't know if that's an issue that we can resolve, but I hear a fair amount of folks that call me and email me for those things. So thank you for being on top of that, but maybe a little bit more work there. The other one was, oh, shoot.
Archer weeds.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay away from those things completely.
Birds and.
I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you. I'm done.
Catherine.
There's another kind of grant cycle out from Mount Hood Territories. That's a possibility for some stuff that I'm looking at. Just what could we, apply for, but I'll be, working with Rochelle on that. The good news is that I have been kind of working a little bit with Rochelle and Tiana, who are just doing an excellent job. If you've seen I encourage you to read the write-up, and I'm sorry, I'm going to poach a little bit on your territory, Lori, so I apologize in advance, but the work on the write-up on the Tickle Creek Trail and update on the website is very well written. It really explains things. And what we've got going on there, like I said, 100 trees down and all, but we still have standing hazard trees that are leaners. There's root sprung. You can kind of see how the ground is kind of lifted up and stuff. And then there's just some there's some leaners and root sprung. And those immediate hazards need to come down. They're, if you were to hire one of these tree cutter services, that would cost the city thousands and thousands of dollars. We've got then we've got the big trails, trees across the trail, which in some cases are at least 3 feet in diameter. Some of them are a little bit bound up. So there's technical expertise needed for falling and not getting things pinched. So we reached out to the Mount Hood National Forest Zigzag Fire Crew, who does that, on fires and everything else. Reached out to, we have a new thing, the Ant Farm got, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars is kind of what I've heard for fuel reduction in the whole Mount Hood 26 corridor. They have hired this Willamette ex-fire guy that used to teach SAW certification and all that. And he's also trained as an arborist, and he's already paid and working with them to help. And this crew of, I think it's five or six older individuals, not kids, are working on slash reduction, fuel reduction and fire prevention stuff. And they've been working for over a year, and they're very, it sounds like a wonderful program. And so they're volunteering to help us do that. So between those two groups, we're really hopeful about getting things logged out for free, for almost free. We also have the potential for the trails, especially the cedar that came down across the trail, kind of cutting out some big chunks. And trying to kind of utilize at least 8-foot trunks that we could then bring down and get milled up for future community garden beds, you know, pieces for future bridge decking replacement and things like that. So kind of just making hay out of the, you know, making lemonade out of the lemon. So then we're also just looking at kind of long-term strategies of how to deal with the situation out there. But that's the short-term stuff. And so the short-term, we've got some real potential talented partners. I've also been checking all the agreements, intergovernmental agreements. You know, Clackamas County Fire has a contract with Mount Hood National Forest, and Ant Farms, you know, already got agreements and stuff. So just making sure, you know, there's always potential to do stuff, but do you have an agreement that's legal to do it is kind of the second part of that. So really promising, and we're hoping to kind of get that finalized here, at least the short-term stuff probably in the next week or so, to kind of figure out what we're doing and then be able to publicize that. And hopefully, you know, I'm hopeful with all that to get it trail open within a month or so. So the whole trail.
Wow, that's amazing.
it
And
is.
you know,
Exciting.
you know how important it is when all the community members that are, I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure they approach me out in public
Yeah.
wanting to know about the trail, when it's gonna open, and
Yeah.
so it's super important.
Yeah.
So,
If I can just add that Counselor Walker's been really integral
Yeah.
in getting that process continuing to move it forward. You have so many contacts and know who to go to when you don't know the right one, that it's just been very helpful to streamline our processes internally. and-
both
Build off
to
that
get it there
knowledge.
originally and to keep it going.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
but
so,
yeah, we have so much talent in our community that are willing to kind of step forward and help us get it done.
It's great. Thank you. Rich.
Like Kelly, while you're sitting here, I just want to say thank you very much for the clear and objective audit. I think that was a big gap in our city's ability to develop. I think we have a moratorium right now, which I think has helped, but this will hopefully fix things, at least until they change it again. But thank you for taking the time and the importance of that. And I think it was super important for our community. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And for your team and for the planning commission for reading all 294 pages.
Really.
Troopers. Yeah. That's really, I think, all I'm gonna say tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Lori, you're up.
I'll try and make this quick before the radio tap out goes off. So there'll be an open house at the Sandy Community Center on March 6th and April 18th for the Deer Point open house for the park. If you guys want to have any input on that moving forward, or if anybody in the community would like to, that will be your opportunity for public comment and to pick your park. So that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. Chris.
I'll be quick too. I only had one meeting since the last council meeting, which was economic development, where we had a presentation from the library. They were doing outreach for a letter for recommendation for a support vehicle. And that went very well. We also did our comp plan review on Block 3, and we discussed the recently signed retail market analysis contract. So we were discussing comparable cities that they should go after. And that was still up in the air as to what cities they chose, but we were talking about a different selection of cities. And then I went on vacation for 7 days, so I wasn't in the state. So that's all.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so as mentioned, just been have given a couple of testimonies to the legislature. That's always an interesting process. Nellie's doing a great job. And if we can get the 3 million, as I told Nellie, she's like, we got to do the 3 million and then there's the 5, either or. And I said, we'll take both. Like we'll go past 8, you know, it'd be great. So she's working it. I don't know if anyone else is going. I'll be at the Estacada city dinner on Thursday evening on 22nd. Oh, awesome. You know, guys, they're beginning their wastewater journey. So like, let's not all go in there as the experts who know it all, you know, and with all these opinions. They're just at the beginning of theirs.
So until we get all of our money, I'm not telling them nothing.
Yeah, right. Right. No, I don't know who picked that topic over dinner, but you know, it'll be a good time. And then with that, and I just learned it at this meeting, just a giant thank you to our planning commission, as you
Yes.
mentioned, and for all the feedback they gave. I've asked Jeff to help compose a letter that we can get out to them, thanking them for their hard work on that. And I know there's several of us that have gone through vetting of planning commissioners and all that. It's kind of a proud moment of some of the vet going through and seeing some of those folks step up and do that, especially with so many new ones that we have. So great, and great job to staff and Kelly and your team for all the hard work on
Yeah, the
that.
planning commission chair, the new chair is also on the economic development.
Yes, yes, we've got
Committee
some
now.
real active people, which is great. Darren. And so with that, remember to stick around for our urban renewal board meeting, but I'm going to adjourn our city council meeting.